Spring is upon us here in New Hampshire. The sun is shining, the snow is melting, people are enjoying their time spent outside, and gun control is at the forefront of our nation's minds once again. There's discourse on both sides, and even within the GOP itself. Everybody seems to be talking, but no one really seems to be saying anything. I'm curious as to what people truly think and how they're feeling. I'm here on campus at Southern New Hampshire University to get the opinions of my peers and classmates and to get their 2 cents on the subject. Let's go. I figured I'd start where I knew people would be at the ready to delve into issues like this, SNHU's Women's Center. Inside, I encountered Megan Palmer, a student and co-editor-in-chief of the university's student-run newspaper, the Penman Press. So, in light of recent events, specifically the Parkland shooting, gun control's been probably the hottest topic it's ever been in this country. Everybody's talking about it, Congress, the civilians, everyone's got an opinion. Can I just get yours real quick?
I think when it comes to gun control in light of recent events, it's important for us, particularly as college-age students, to consider the impact that we can have. I think common sense gun control and reform is imperative, and that we have let it go on for too long. We've lost too many children, and I think it's really important, especially with Parkland, that these are not second graders. These are high school students who have social media, who have the capability to speak, who have a voice. And for me, my opinion is about keeping those students safe, remembering that even though I'm not going to be a student for much longer, that those things affect real people all over the country. When it comes to talking about gun control, I remember recently reading an article where they said, if there was this time to talk about gun control, which was X amount number of days after a shooting, that there would only be 4 days that we could talk about gun control where it wasn't too close to a tragedy. And in regards to undervaluing our youth, I think we undervalue their potential, their capabilities, and their ability to form their own opinions about things. They have very real, very lived experiences now, particularly students at Parkland, that are going to affect them for the rest of their lives. And it is naive to think that students that are younger are incapable of forming their own opinions and are incapable of having those opinions be educated and important, especially with the increase in technology. Students have access to any kind of information they want, and to assume that they are uneducated is 100% to devalue and to undervalue them. I think when it comes to what we do going forward, the most important thing we have to start doing is talking and talking about it with people who don't agree with us, and trying to figure out where that common ground exists. Yelling about it on Facebook is not enough. Sending thoughts and prayers is not ever going to be enough. It hasn't ever been enough. And moving forward, it's important that people remember that their voice matters, that their vote matters, that they are engaged, that they are active citizens, because things will not change if we allow these decisions to be made by folks who are having their wallets padded every time they vote. When it comes to politicians and when it comes to everybody, I think we have become so desensitized to violence and to tragedy that we expect it. And it happens, and we feel sad about it, and we say the right things or we say the wrong things, and then we move on. Part of this might stem out of the fact that it sucks to talk about. It's not fun. It's not always productive either. But there is a level of remove, I think, for politicians who may not have ever had their child in a public school, who may never have had that kind of fear, for whom gun control is not about what it was intended when founding fathers wrote laws about, like owning a gun. There's a very big distance, I think, between how we talk about things, who's talking about them, and who has the power to actually cause change. For change to be as immediate as I think a lot of people want it to be, it would have to be radical, and that still would not solve the problem. We conflate this issue into a lot of other different issues. People are very quick to talk about mental health. People are very quick to talk about these whys that are exacerbated by the fact that these people have guns. And in terms of what I would like to see, I think, 1, conversation keep happening. 2, you probably shouldn't have an AR-15 or an AK-47. There's really no need for it. 3, politicians that are driven by the people and not by the NRA. 4, no NRA. 5 would be, I think, how do I want to phrase this? To address some of the systemic roots of these problems and to acknowledge that it's toxic masculinity.
After talking with Megan, I ran into Aimee Mercedes outside, a student with a fiery attitude and track record of passionate tangents.
I think that the fact that the only time that we're ever talking about gun control is after mass shooting should be a big problem and a big issue that more people should be aware of. After what happened in Newtown, the fact that 20 first graders got gunned down and nothing happened. Now, with time going by and passing, more and more people are starting to get really fed up because I think that it's starting to affect more and more people. I think that we're seeing it less now. We're still seeing it on the news, but we're starting to know those people on the news. We're starting to see more of ourselves in them. I think that what the kids in Parkland are doing is incredible, but I also think that it shouldn't really come to a surprise to too many people. I mean, these are the kids that, on the low are kind of eating Tide Pods and living. They're badasses and they're just here to make change, and I think they're starting to really get fed up with the passiveness that lies in this country. So I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud of them. No matter what we do with legislation, I think we really have to come down to the problem, to the root of the issue. And for me, I personally believe that it comes from toxic masculinity. Is that because we're raising our boys to be these men that don't have any feelings? Men aren't really allowed to express their emotions unless if it's anger or, after they've had a few drinks, and it's really, really, really scary. It's really, really scary. And I think that once we can really address that, we'll start seeing the rippling effects from it.
Finished on campus, I moved on to the surrounding Hooksett region. I ran into a teacher I had in high school, Chad Sanford. Being a public educator, I ventured that he'd have a lot to say. So as a public educator, you work in the public school system. Obviously, I feel like you probably have some opinions on the subject of gun control.
Well, first off, we definitely need to do more for mental health, and I'm hoping that there might be a little bit more willpower to address that issue and the funding challenges that go with that. I do think that some reforms would be appropriate too in terms of access. But for me, the big question is, in this political climate, can the different sides come together and really get anything done? So I'm hopeful that that's going to happen, but I'm not sure. I think it's really important that at least we address the issue of access to guns before a certain age. I think both sides seem to be in agreement with the idea of raising the age to 21 for purchasing of AR-15s and other similar rifles, and I think that's certainly a sensible solution. In terms of other actions, I'm hopeful that more will be done, but I'm not sure that there's going to be the political collaboration necessary, if you will, to see that accomplished.
Shooter's Outpost, one of the more recent weapons retailers in New Hampshire, which is currently undergoing expansion, declined to comment on the issue. Bass Pro Shops, a sportsman's retailer known for also selling weapons, was legally barred from commenting by their corporate superiors. Wicked Weaponry Firearms, an almost hole-in-the-wall establishment who shares a small plaza with a bakery, broke the chain by agreeing to be interviewed. Ben Boscheman, a representative of the store, gave moderate insight into the pro-gun side of the argument. So, obviously, in light of recent events, gun control has been the hottest topic it's probably ever been in the nation. A lot of people want to take guns away. A lot of people are focusing on AR specifically, and people are just up in arms right now. Everybody, pro-guns, anti-guns.
I understand that there's There's a lot of people who are concerned about firearms right now. Anti-gun people, pro-gun people. There's a lot that goes into the gun debate right now. And I think that it's really hard because people want to focus on one thing or the other. They want to focus on technology, or they want to focus on legislation, they want to focus on mental health, or they want to focus on high-capacity magazines. So there's a lot of like different directions to go into. And I think it's hard for people to have a diverse conversation about firearms without hyper-focusing on one thing or the other. So the first thing that we seem to have a hard time discussing is technology. So it's the low-hanging fruit that gun regulation see, I don't like calling people anti-gun because it kind of has like a negative connotation. But the people who are advocating for stricter gun measures. Technology is the first thing they go after. So whether it be high-capacity magazines or AR-15s or the things that, what they call assault weapons, which again, there's no real definition on what an assault weapon is or isn't. So I think we have to have the technology conversation first, because if we don't, then we're all just kind of spitting words at each other and we don't know what we're really talking about. I think a lot of the pro-gun guys don't want to talk about it because they're afraid that as soon as we start down that conversation, it will be validating the pro-gun legislation people, saying that we should take away something or not take away another thing. But I think that we're not going to have definitions of what assault weapons are until we have that. So, I challenge people, if you want to talk to somebody about banning an AR-15, ask them why that specifically. What about that gun makes you want to ban that versus something else? They start focusing on like weird things that make an AR-15 an AR-15, but those are also features that are in other guns. So it almost validates the slippery slope argument when you start talking about that, because if you don't like threaded barrels, well, there's tons of stuff that have threaded barrels. If you don't like semi-automatic firearms, I mean, that's 90% of the firearms on the market. So like, what are we really regulating? If you can help people understand the differences in the technology, then maybe we can get past that low-hanging fruit and start treating some symptomatic things. It's cliche to talk about mental health, but I mean, it's clearly a factor in a lot of these situations. It's cliche to talk about background checks, but from a dealer standpoint, there's massive problems with the background check system, self-admittedly by state police agencies and the federal government. Fix those before we start looking at technology. And in a lot of these situations, when someone who should have been prohibited from buying a firearm, the background check system and what is required by the background check system allowed them to get that firearm. Again, everything worked, but clearly it didn't work because that person shouldn't have had a firearm. So, we talk about reporting from law enforcement agencies, reporting from, schools or mental health facilities. But then when we start talking about that, now we're talking about HIPAA laws, and where do we draw the line in the sand when it comes to mental health? What is someone who just has a little bit of depression versus someone who is likely to commit a violent act? So it's a massive conversation that we have to have, and I think for a lot of people, it's daunting to have the conversation, and that's why it's much easier to focus on a firearm or a magazine or a feature on a gun that makes it look scary or intimidating. My closing thoughts are this. I think we need to have more conversations about firearms. I think we need to have more conversations with people on the other side, whatever side you're on, because if you don't understand the arguments, then you're just arguing, and that's not going to help anybody.
Given that the only people that were willing to talk to me were pro-legislation, I can only assume that the majority of people, or at least the most verbal, on campus and in Hooksett are in favor of seeing change happen. And when it comes to rational discourse on the issue, at least according to Ben, the offer is on the table.